you for joining us. My name's Vikki. The people that don't know me, my very first today conversation with Vikki, so it's episode 1, and we are planning to take these episodes each month with a different topic and a different discussion group. So just a little bit about me. I had 25 years in the banking sector and came down with a postnatal depression when I had my 2 babies, and therefore led me on a career and lifestyle of mental wellness. So with that in mind, I am now a mental health first aid facilitator and have a real passion for raising awareness of mental health to a majority of people. So with that in mind, I have had a little bit of a difficult year. My brother was a helicopter pilot, and he so we'll just admin the next person. So my brother worked in the United States, lived in Adelaide, Australia, and he would work 3 monthly contracts. So unfortunately this year in April, he was crossing a motorway in the States and he got knocked down and hit by a car and died instantly on impact. So not only just a month ago, I also lost somebody very dear to me, and that was our family pet. He ran across the road, got hit by a car and died instantly on impact. So the loss of my brother resonated again, and the whole mourning process has kicked in. So with that in mind, I thought what better opportunity to run our first episode and talk about grief. It's been a challenging time with COVID and with people not being able to farewell their loved ones in what we would call normal period, and the grief process is absolutely different for everybody. So I've asked a really beautiful special friend of mine, Christina Baid, to come on board, and I'm going to read her introduction so I do it the appropriate credibility. So I'll just say Christina Baid is a self-described kindness consultant. She is a psychologist with a PhD in psychology. Her extensive career includes roles in university tutoring, leadership development, training, support and recruitment of aid and development workers. She also spends time supporting patients and families in palliative care, where she used to lead a grief support group. So this diverse experience has provided her with rich and diverse background in human behaviour, which she has focused on well-being at work through the lens of building kindness to self and others. Just before I ask Christina to talk, I'll just give you some house rules. We are recording this session for those that have been unable to join us. We will be asking you to leave your questions till the end, where we will stop recording so you can have a more personal opportunity to ask questions. So with that being said, I would love to hand it over to Christina Baid, where she can help us as to how we deal with grief, particularly within the workplace. Thanks very much, Christina.
Thanks, Vikki. Yeah, I thought it might be useful to just open up with talking a little bit about what grief actually is. And I think that we can describe it as the reaction we have to the loss of something that's meaningful to us. And that doesn't have to be a person or a pet. We refer to that as bereavement when a person is involved. But we also experience grief when, for example, we're made redundant. There is a lot of grief involved in redundancy. We experience grief when a close friend moves away from us to another country or another city, or if we lose our house through financial problems or other reasons. So grief is a bigger term than just when we lose a person, which we refer to as bereavement. And grief is also can be I mean, there's lots of different forms of grief. And one of the things that Vikki said was the loss of her pet. And often we find that society views different griefs differently. And one of the different types of grief that we can talk about is disenfranchised grief. And that's where the grief you're experiencing isn't recognized by the people around you or society. And that can happen in the loss of a pet, because people think, oh, it's just a pet, whereas pet lovers know how close and how attached we are to those members of our family. You also see disenfranchised grief used to be quite common around miscarriage. Because we didn't talk about it, we didn't acknowledge that type of grief. And we do that a lot better nowadays, I think. We're really moving towards accepting that as society. Also, in my work, when I was working in palliative care, we used to see a lot of anticipatory grief. And that would be when the grief process would actually start before someone passed away. And so that's quite common in sickness or cancer when you know that someone is terminal. The grief process often starts way before the person actually passes. And another type of grief that I'm most familiar with personally is what we call non-finite loss. And this is a situation where the loss isn't clearly defined. And for me, this was around infertility. And we call it a non-finite loss because there is nothing, no solidity to what you're grieving, to this loss. You're losing something that you can't do, not something that you did have. Non-finite loss could also be experienced by people who want to get married and have a family, and for whatever reason are unable to. So it expresses a much more less defined process, something that's really ongoing, and it doesn't have good boundaries. You don't have a funeral for your fertility. You know, people don't come around and gather, and you don't have a shared experience that brings some sort of closure and connection to it. So those are some of the different types of grief that we might see. Did you want to ask a question, Vikki, or do you want me to just keep talking?
Yeah, look, I'm really engaged at the moment, and everything you're saying is resonating with me. So please go ahead.
So, you know, this experience of loss, it impacts us physically, psychologically, and spiritually. It's really holistic. It's sort of like getting whacked, really, isn't it, by a truck? And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that this is actually normal. And one of the things I used to see a lot when I was working in palliative care was especially young people thinking that there was something wrong with them. I'm so sad. I'm waking up every morning and crying. What's wrong with me? It's like, nothing's wrong with you. This is grief. Grief is part of the normal human condition. This is a normal expression of emotion. This is a really normal reaction to what has happened to you, to this feeling of loss that you're experiencing. So I think that's really important to embrace grief, if you like, as part of life, as part of loving, as part of having meaningful things, meaningful goals, meaningful jobs.
So what about some practical tools? For example, we're in the workplace and we went in a amazing wellness space, and then something has triggered us throughout the day. Perhaps you can share some practical tools that maybe our managers can incorporate into how to manage the cycle of grief.
Yeah. So, and I think, yeah, I think how we talk about grief is important here as well. That actually, you know, in our New Zealand workplaces, we get 3 days or 5 days bereavement leave. And there's almost this expectation that then you'll come back and be normal. But grief is a very ongoing process. It takes a long time. And other cultures, they you know, they support that length of time a lot better than we do in our Western culture, I think. And so I think that that's the first thing is don't expect it to have gone away after 1 week or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. You know, it will still be there, and that's still normal. And one of the things that I read, which I really like, is that it isn't about making grief go away. It's about growing our life to be big enough to encompass the grief that we're experiencing. And so I think it's quite important to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, and to carry on with things when you're ready to go back to work. But like anything, there's a balance there. And I was thinking about this as I was preparing for the webinar. And it's a bit like, you know, when you say that you've got a sore foot, and we're sort of taught, well, that means our body is telling us something. I shouldn't run the marathon tomorrow because I'm injured. But if we had just started training for a marathon, we might also have a sore foot, and that might be a good thing. And so there's this idea of, is the pain, I think sometimes we can think, I'm in pain, I'm sad. And our natural response with grief is this sort of closing in, this sort of hunkering down, this desire to nest. And so it can be quite difficult to motivate and get up and go to work. But there's this idea that perhaps it's not an injury, perhaps we're training. And so we can still get up and go to work and do some things. And I guess some of the people that I have seen that have struggled most with grief were those that didn't take those steps to rebuild their life, to make their life big enough to encompass the grief. They were the ones who really got stuck in that hunkering down feeling that I'm hurting and I'm not going to do things, rather than I'm grieving and I'm going to work. And I think that's that being able to add the and is really key there. But there will be moments at work when things remind you of your loved one, remind you of your loss, and you feel emotional. And that can be pretty difficult. And sometimes it can help to prepare your colleagues and say, actually, if I cry in the corner today, I want you to do X and Y. And think about what you want them to do. Some people want to just be ignored. They want to go, yeah, this is grief, this is normal. I'm just going to have a little cry in the corner, and then I'm going to get back to things. Other people might want some expressions of sympathy and care, or checking in to see if they're okay. Because again, grief is such an individual experience, and what we need in response to the grief will be quite different, depending on who we are.
I love that, Christina. It's about transparency, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really just about transparency, and there's no timeline with grief. I know we get a number of days with our organisation to have off for the funeral process, but there is absolutely no timeline as far as grief goes. And I love the fact that you raise different subjects. You know, it's not always just about losing somebody. It can be a grief of not having something or not being inclusive of something. So, look, I absolutely have found for myself personally that the Te Whare Tapawha wellbeing model has been my life saviour. From a spiritual perspective, certainly I've had beautiful people close to me, and for them to be able to just say that I'm sorry and that I'm here for you has been a really great opportunity for me. But more importantly, from a spiritual perspective, just to get out into nature and see the beauty of the world. And water for me and being by a stream is very therapeutic as well. So I think that there's sometimes no right and wrong way other than the fact to be able to get it out. For me, I've seen people just soldier on. That's what happens, soldier on, and that's potentially stuffing the emotions down. And somewhere along the line, those emotions need to break free, and it could potentially be in a volatile situation in a meeting. I think I've shared with you personally this week that my feelings this week has been anger. I'm feeling anger, and I can sometimes see myself striking out and not being probably as patient with the kids as what I would like to be. And I suggested to you that maybe I should go to one of those smash rooms and just put a bat in my hand. I have young children and we have chickens, so I often give the chicken eggs to my kids and let them throw them up against the fence with an opportunity to release the anger. Maybe just finally, before we finish up, I know people talk about the emotions of grief, and I know you're not a huge fan of it, but I certainly have been doing a bit of a roller coaster. Maybe you could talk about that.
So you're referring to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, where she talks about you go through different emotions: denial, anger, something, finally acceptance. And I mean, that model's had a lot of criticism, primarily because she worked with people who were terminally ill. So it was really a model of how you accept a terminal diagnosis rather than of grieving someone who you had lost. But I think all these different theories all give us some clues. And the helpful thing about hers is that you're going to experience a range of emotions during grief, that it's not just this feeling sad, that actually it is anger, it is sadness, it is frustration, it is all the things. And that can be helpful to say, well, this is grief too. This, what I'm feeling today, is grief too. And I think for women, anger is a particularly difficult emotion to embrace because we're not really encouraged to get in touch with our anger. And as I said, you know, grief, sadness is this hunkering in sort of feeling in your body. Anger is a real explosive feeling in your body. And sometimes it can help to really tune into, when I say I'm angry, what does my body want to do? And doing something that sort of expresses that energy, like stomping up the stairs, can sometimes be helpful. But I think anger is also, it can tell us things. And if you're able to sit with that anger and just soften around it a little bit and say, I'm really angry. What might that be telling me? Or what am I angry about? We often talk about anger as being a signal that our boundaries have been crossed in some way. But, you know, in this sort of situation, I think if we're grieving and we're experiencing anger, it's often because the way that we see the world has been challenged. So we might think that the world is a safe place, that bad things don't happen to me. And some of those constructions of the world that give us stability are gone. And that can make us feel really angry, because the whole our whole way of seeing the world is suddenly being swept away. And that brings us to some other theories of grief. One I like by Ngāi. He suggests that one of the big pieces of work we need to do when we're grieving is around meaning and construction of meaning. So it's this, what does this mean for me? And you often see people really sort of reorienting their purpose in the face of loss. That can be a real time of saying, of really getting in touch with what's important to you. And so it's also an opportunity to add more meaning to your life, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, look, all of that information is great. And I think just keeping the communication flowing, be real, be honest, be transparent is really, really important. So with that in mind, we've come to our 30-minute talk. I did want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So we will stop recording shortly. Okay, it's stopped. Okay, so just before we stop the recording, please feel free to reach out to Christina or myself. We are happy to lead you in the direction for myself, a mental health perspective. I have a number of lifelines and contact people that you can talk to should you be grieving, and Christina can certainly help in more of a counselling perspective. We do have your email addresses, so we will be sending you a copy of this recording for the people that were unable to attend. But I'm also excited, next month and the month of December, this is just our first ever episode, but we've got some amazing speakers coming forward. And stay tuned and join us for conversations with Vikki on wellness within the workplace. Thanks very much, and we'll end the recording there.